So as we come to the end of a very difficult 2020, and as I record this, there's a bunch of snow on the ground, and it's hard to imagine that spring will come, but it will. And with spring comes wedding season. And I wanted to talk today about who needs a prenuptial agreement and why. I'm Catherine Miller, and I've been a family attorney in New York City and New York State in Westchester County for over 30 years. And here's what I've learned in the time that I have been working with people who are getting married and talking about prenuptial agreements. The first group of people are people who come from families of wealth, whose families, usually these are people who are getting married for the first time, whose families want them to have a prenup because they're worried about the succession of their money, and they're worried that the marriage will end in divorce and that somehow their family wealth will be siphoned off. And so very often people who are young people getting married need a prenup because their families and their inheritances are at risk, and that's something to consider. The second group of people who really should consider a prenup are people who are getting married maybe a little bit later in life, who've amassed some wealth or started a business and who have something to lose, something in their own names. And they want to make sure that those assets are protected at the end of the marriage, whether or not the marriage ends by divorce or by death. And the third group of people who really should consider a prenup are people who've been married before or who have children from a prior relationship, who want to make sure that those children are protected when this marriage comes to an end. And one thing that I think it's really important to understand is that all marriages come to an end. Sometimes they come to an end by divorce, which is what we often think about when we're talking about a prenuptial agreement. But if they don't end in divorce, they're going to end in death when one spouse dies toward the end of a long and happy marriage. And so these are two very different areas that people need to consider when they're thinking about getting married and thinking about the possibility of a prenuptial agreement. We've put together a guide about prenuptial agreements, who should consider them and why. And if you give us your information in the links below, I'd love to send it over to you. Again, I'm Catherine Miller. Thanks for listening.